My mother-in-law locked me up, told my fiancé I was dead, and he married my half-sister. They froze when I showed up at the wedding. My name is Elodie Duval. I'm 27 years old. I never would have imagined that my life could turn upside down so quickly, especially when everything seemed so perfect. Gabriel and I had been together for 4 years. He was patient, attentive, and loved me in a way I had never known. His presence was comforting, reassuring, and I often found myself smiling alone just thinking about him. Our engagement had taken place just a week prior, a private dinner with close friends. The kind of evening that lingers in memory, warm and golden. I was floating in a veil of happiness, imagining our life together, our apartment in Chicago, our weekend getaways to the countryside, our cozy mornings with coffee and laughter. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, cracks were forming. Patricia Morin, formerly Victoria Stanton, my mother-in-law, had always held a subtle contempt for me. She masked it with a polished smile, sweet words, and a pretense of maternal solicitude. But I felt it in every glance, every subtle twitch when she thought no one was looking. She casually criticized my clothes, my posture, and even the way I laughed with Gabriel. At first, I ignored it, telling myself she was just difficult, that everyone had their quirks, and perhaps she was just adjusting to me being a part of her life. Sophie, formerly Emily, her daughter, was another story. She seemed harmless, always smiling, always helpful, but there was something calculated in her eyes, a subtle eagerness to please Patricia at any cost. I sometimes caught her watching me. Small, quiet moments of observation that made me uneasy, though I could never pinpoint why. I felt like I was being measured, judged, and recorded for a purpose I couldn't yet perceive. That evening, I remember I was preparing dinner in the kitchen. Gabriel had gone out to get flowers, a spontaneous gesture that, he said, would brighten my week. I was softly humming, feeling light and content, when Patricia appeared, gliding into the kitchen as if she owned it. She placed her hands on her hips, smiling excessively. "Elodie, darling," she said, her voice syrupy. "I hope you're being careful with that knife. You wouldn't want to hurt yourself, would you?" I laughed nervously, moving around her. "I'm fine, Patricia, really. Are you?" She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm just worried about you. Gabriel has a lot on his mind. It would be tragic if something happened to you before the wedding." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. I laughed again, forcing it to sound light, but I felt the unease wash over me. It wasn't concern, it was control. Subtle but undeniable. The weeks passed, and her behavior became more insidious. I noticed the way she intercepted Gabriel's calls when I was in another room. Small, deliberate annoyances, misplacing my things, giving vague instructions, planting seeds of doubt. Sophie, always nearby, mimicked her mother's subtle manipulations, making small remarks that seemed innocent but carried hidden barbs. And then came the day I was taken. I had been invited to help with a garden project behind the house, an errand Sophie had suggested. I found it normal, mundane, nothing to warrant suspicion. But as soon as I stepped into the shed she had prepared, Patricia appeared behind me. Her face was cold, her hands firm as she pushed me inside. The door slammed shut. I pounded on it, I screamed, but she had locked me in without a key, without an explanation, leaving me only a small ration of water and a whispered promise that the world would believe I was gone. I listened to her footsteps fade away, Sophie's muffled laughter faintly echoing, and I felt my heart stop. My mind raced. I beat on the walls, called Gabriel's name, but there was only silence. Hours turned into days, and a terrifying realization took root. Patricia had told everyone I was dead. She had taken everything from me. My freedom, my voice, my life as I knew it. Shock and disbelief consumed me, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. A terror that seemed to grow with every passing hour. I collapsed onto the cold wooden floor. Tears streamed down my face, dirt and grime staining my skin. Every thought revolved around Gabriel, the life we had planned, the home we were meant to build together. And in that suffocating darkness, a single thought of defiance began to grow. I will survive. I must survive. She could not so carelessly take my life. The first days in that dark, stifling shed were unbearable. I counted the hours in silence. My stomach gnawed with hunger, my throat parched with thirst. The only light came from a small grimy window high up, but it was never enough to lift the weight pressing down on me. I tried to keep my mind busy, repeating Gabriel's name, reminiscing about our laughter, the warmth of our apartment, his gentle hand in mine. But despair always returned, relentless and cold. I gleaned what little I could find. A piece of stale bread hidden in a dusty corner. A cup of rainwater that had collected in a tiny crack in the wall. Every bite and every sip was precious, a reminder that I had to survive, no matter my weakness. I slept in short bursts, curled up, listening for any sound from the outside world, hoping someone would come, hoping someone would notice my absence. Memories of my life before the imprisonment flashed through my mind with heartbreaking clarity. I remembered Gabriel surprising me with flowers, our late-night conversations about our dreams and plans. I remembered laughing at Sophie's awkward jokes, oblivious to her silent complicity in my eventual imprisonment. Patricia's smile, always so neat, so controlled, replayed like a knife twisting in my chest. I realized then how subtle her manipulation had been, how carefully she had orchestrated my isolation, and the rage within me ignited. I began to test the shed, running my hands over the walls, pulling at the door, examining every joint. The lock was old and rusty, the wood brittle in places. My first attempts were clumsy, exhausting, often leaving me bruised and bleeding. But I refused to stop. Each failure made my determination stronger. I remembered that Gabriel believed me dead, that Sophie had taken his hand while I was trapped, and that Patricia had orchestrated this cruel theft of my life. Anger became my fuel, transforming my fear into action. I learned to pace my strength, conserving energy while pushing the limits of what my frail, starving body could endure. I created a routine, exploring the shed for weaknesses, eating tiny crumbs, only drinking water when necessary, and staying up at night planning my escape. The darkness became familiar, almost comforting, a space where my mind could sharpen and my resolve could harden. Sometimes I whispered to myself, imagining what I would say to Gabriel when I finally saw him again, how I would confront Patricia and Sophie. These imaginings gave me strength, though they also brought tears to my eyes. The pain of longing and betrayal was almost too much to bear. I clung to the hope that if I could endure, if I could survive, I could reclaim everything that had been stolen from me. The days stretched into a week, and I noticed patterns in the comings and goings outside the shed. Sophie would occasionally linger near the window, Patricia's heels clicking in the distance as she moved through the house. I memorized their routine, timing my movements, looking for the moment when the door would be least guarded. Every sound became a clue. Every shadow, a possible path to freedom. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I discovered the weak joint along the corner of the door. My hands trembled as I pressed and forced it, feeling the fragile would give way slightly. My heart hammered in my chest, the promise of freedom taunting me. I imagined Gabriel waiting, the wedding preparations underway, the injustice of my absence fueling the urgency. I knew I had to act quickly, or it would be too late. Even as my body ached and my morale wavered, I whispered words of encouragement to myself. You are stronger than this. You will not be forgotten. You will survive. Anger and hope intertwined, giving me the clarity and courage I needed. I understood then that survival wasn't just about living, it was about taking back my life, reclaiming my love, and confronting the deception that had tried to erase me. I pressed my hands against the door one last time, feeling the lock yield slightly. It was fragile, yes, but it was a start. All my energy went into the push, the pull, the forcing, until the door opened just enough for me to slip through. Freedom smelled of dust, rain, and opportunity. My feet hit the ground, bare and trembling, but my spirit was soaring. I was alive, I was free, and I would not be silenced. Even in the darkest moments, strength grows quietly. Patience and resilience cultivate hope, guiding us towards justice, love, and the courage to reclaim our lives. I had barely caught my breath when the first signs of the wedding reached me. The news hit me like a thunderbolt. Gabriel and Sophie were set to marry in less than a week. My stomach clenched violently, my mind swimming in disbelief and fury. How could he plan this while I was locked away, unseen, declared dead? How could he, the man I loved, prepare to say I do to someone else while I suffered? The injustice of it burned hotter than any hunger or thirst I had endured. I forced myself to think clearly. Panic had no place here, only strategy could save me. I recalled every detail of the shed, every weakness I had noticed in the walls and the lock. I traced my fingers along the edges, feeling the brittle wood, the rusty nails that had held me captive. Sunlight through the high window barely touched the floor, but it illuminated enough for me to meticulously inspect my small world. I knew the time for action was now. Sophie's name resonated in my mind. I remembered those quiet, guarded smiles, the way she mimicked Patricia's subtle cruelty, the way she had so easily stepped into my place. I would confront her, but that could wait. First, I had to regain my freedom and stop this wedding from happening, even for a moment. The thought of seeing Gabriel again, even briefly, sharpened my focus. Every ache in my body, every bruise and cut, became fuel. I found a weak joint near the back corner of the shed that I had tested in the past but never fully exploited. Today, desperation honed my senses. I pressed, twisted and forced, listening to the soft crack of the wood yielding beneath my hands. My heart pounded in my ears, mixing with the chirping of birds outside, oblivious to the human drama unfolding. The lock was rusted and stubborn, but it finally gave way to my perseverance. One last shove, and the door opened just enough for me to slip through. A narrow space between the darkness and the bright, cruel world beyond. Outside, the air hit me like a shockwave. Sunlight warm on my bruised skin, the smell of rain-soaked earth mixing with a familiar scent from the garden I once tended. I froze for a heartbeat, letting the sensations wash over me, drawing strength from the world that had been denied to me for so long. I moved cautiously at first, listening for the inevitable sounds of Patricia or Sophie discovering my escape. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying both the scent of freedom and the tension of imminent confrontation. I charted my course to the venue in my mind, visualizing the streets, the cars, the small neighborhood roads. Every step had to be careful but quick. I couldn't afford to hesitate. My feet, bare and scraped, carried me forward with a combination of exhaustion and determination. My dress, torn and stained by my captivity, clung to me in uneven patches. Yet, I barely noticed it. Every movement was a declaration: I would not be silenced. I would not be forgotten. As I neared the street leading to the venue, I paused, listening. Voices floated faintly: Sophie, Patricia, maybe some of the caterers and wedding staff. Everything was aligning in my favor. The household's attention was elsewhere. I continued, each step bringing me closer to the confrontation I had imagined for days, weeks, perhaps months. I thought of Gabriel, the man who had loved me, who believed me dead, and who now stood at the altar, unaware that he was about to marry someone else. The idea of facing him squeezed my chest, a mix of dread, yearning, and resolve. I allowed myself a single deep breath, savoring the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was my moment, a chance to reclaim my life, to interrupt the deception, to confront those who had tried to erase me. My hands clenched into fists, my gaze sharpened, and I ran the final steps to the hall. A blur of motion and raw emotion. The doors stood before me, the sounds of the ceremony inside filtering out. I adjusted my stance, straightened my shoulders, and prepared to face everything I had endured. Every second felt like an eternity. The decision to act, to confront, to survive, had led me here. I stepped forward, and with a final surge of courage, I entered the bright, immaculate hall, ready to face the world that had declared me dead and stolen my love. The hall doors gleamed in the midday sun, polished and pristine, reflecting a life that had continued without me. I hesitated for a brief moment, letting the warmth of the sun hit my face and chest, feeling every scar, every tear, every ounce of struggle that had carried me this far. My bare feet pressed against the tiled floor outside, each step sending a jolt of fear and anticipation through my body. I was bruised, exhausted, and dirty after weeks of confinement, but I was alive, and that single fact made me feel invincible. I adjusted my torn dress, spreading more dust onto it as I moved. My hair, matted and damp from the rain I had walked through earlier, clung to my cheeks and forehead. Tears streamed down my face, staining the remnants of dried grime, giving me a wild, raw look that no makeup could have recreated. I looked at the cars parked along the curb, the faint buzz of excited guests, and I felt a surge of adrenaline that forced my body to move. This was it. There would be no turning back. I ran the final steps along the pavement, every heartbeat resonating in my ears. The hall doors were in sight now, large and shiny, an ironic reflection of the opulence that had been used to celebrate my supposed absence. I remembered every cruel look, every whispered word from Patricia, and the carefully orchestrated lie she had spread about my death. Anger, grief, and pure determination merged, sharpening my focus. I was going to face all of them, and I was going to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I pressed my hand against the heavy wooden door, pushing it open with all the strength I had left. The sound of the grinding hinges seemed deafening in the otherwise quiet room. I paused just long enough to collect myself, letting my gaze sweep over the carefully arranged chairs, the white flower arrangements, the sparkling sunlight filtering through the windows. Everything was so impeccable, so perfect, a stark contrast to my torn, bruised, and dirt-covered body. But perfection no longer held power over me. The moment I stepped fully inside, I saw them. Gabriel, my Gabriel, standing tall at the altar, holding Sophie's hand, their faces radiating joy. The world seemed to slow down. His expression, so familiar, so loved, froze mid-motion. Eyes wide, lips slightly parted. Sophie's smile wavered, confusion and panic flashing across her features. And Patricia, her carefully maintained composure instantly fractured, her hands gripping her dress as her eyes widened in pure, sheer shock. All three of them were frozen, caught in a tableau of utter astonishment that made my pulse quicken with a mix of triumph and dread. I walked forward, each step deliberate, the polished floor echoing beneath my bare feet. The scent of flowers, polished wood, and perfume filled my nose, mixing with the earthy odors that clung to me from my escape. Every eye in the room, every murmur, every gasp seemed to focus on me. I was there, I was alive. I had returned from the void they had tried to cast me into, and I would not be ignored. A tremor ran through me as I approached, every muscle in my body tense with anticipation. I imagined Gabriel's shock, Sophie's fear, and Patricia's horror, and I briefly savored it, only because the weight of everything I had endured pressed down on me. I needed to confront them, to speak the words that had been burning in my heart for weeks. The truth that could no longer be silenced. I stopped in the aisle just a few feet from the couple and Patricia. My breath was ragged, coming in gasps from exertion and tension, but my eyes, shining with tears, were firm and unwavering. This was the moment, the culmination of weeks of fear, starvation, and incessant hope. I would not be erased. I would not be silenced, and I was going to make all of them see exactly what they had tried to destroy. Time seemed to stop as I faced them. Gabriel's hand, still holding Sophie's, was frozen in mid-air. Sophie's radiant smile collapsed into disbelief, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. Patricia's face was pale, her carefully cultivated assurance broken as her jaw slackened. Each of them stared at me as if they had just seen a ghost. A ghost who was very much alive. I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of exhaustion, anger, and grief. The room was silent except for the slight rustling of fabric and the collective shallow breaths of the guests. All eyes were on me, and I felt both exposed and powerful, the rawness of my ordeal somehow lending me a strength I didn't know I possessed. My voice, though raspy after weeks of confinement, found its way into the room, firm and piercing. I am not dead. You lied about me. You locked me up and tried to steal my life. How could you betray me like this? The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. I saw Patricia flinch, her hands clutching the folds of her dress. Sophie took a step back, fear and guilt washing over her features. Gabriel's eyes, wide and haunted, drilled into mine. I wanted to scream at him, to accuse him, to demand why he had believed their lie. But the sight of him, frozen in shock, twisted my heart. I remembered everything, the whispered promises, the stolen moments, the life we had envisioned together, and I realized that despite all the pain, I still loved him. But love mixed with betrayal is a complicated thing, and I needed him to understand, to see the truth that I had lived through. I took one more step, letting them all absorb the reality of my presence. Tears welled in Gabriel's eyes. I saw confusion, shock, guilt, all mirrored in his expression. For a brief second, I allowed myself to see the man I loved, the man who truly believed I was gone. Then I spoke again, softer this time, my voice trembling but firm. And Gabriel, I am here. I survived. You have nothing to say right now. Just look at me. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Sophie's hand tightened around his arm as if to cling to something familiar, but he didn't respond. He only stared at me, wide-eyed, as if the world had tilted and the ground beneath him was no longer solid. Patricia, petrified, seemed to have aged decades in the span of a few seconds. I allowed myself to breathe, letting the raw tension fill the space between us. The betrayal, the grief, and the sheer injustice of their actions weighed heavily on my chest. And yet, in the midst of it all, a fragile hope emerged. I saw the man I loved, the man I had planned a life with. And even in his shock, there was recognition, a flicker that told me he understood, that he regretted, and that he still cared. I couldn't remain silent. I had to voice the depth of my pain, the weeks of suffering, the isolation, the hunger, the despair. I lived through every lie, every betrayal. I endured the darkness you thought would erase me, and now I am here. Gabriel's lips trembled, finally finding a whisper. Elodie, I didn't know. I believed. I believed you were gone. I closed my eyes briefly, swallowing the lump in my throat. Every moment of suffering, every scar, every tear led to this confrontation. I let my gaze meet his again. Firm, demanding, yet cautious. You believed it? You moved on. But I'm here, Gabriel, and I need to know. Do you still feel what you said you felt? His shoulders shook as he struggled to form words, and I saw remorse and raw longing intertwine on his face. In that moment, I knew the path to reconciliation was narrow, perilous, but possible. I was broken, yes, but defiantly whole. And standing here, facing all of them, I realized that my mere presence had shifted the balance. I had survived, and I had reclaimed my right to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved. The room remained silent for what felt like an eternity. The tension was thick and almost unbearable. Gabriel's eyes never left mine, searching, pleading, trying to reconcile the man he had been with the reality that I was very much alive before him. Sophie had backed away, her confidence evaporated, and Patricia's face was the picture of stunned defeat. The mask of control was utterly shattered. I felt a cold satisfaction at their shock, but it was fleeting. My heart was focused elsewhere, on Gabriel, on us, on what we could still rebuild together. He stepped forward, his hand reaching out tentatively, almost afraid I might disappear again if he moved too fast. Elodie, I thought you were gone. I didn't know. I am so sorry. I never meant this. I never meant to lose you. His voice trembled, raw and full of emotion. The sincerity in his eyes, the tremor in his lips, was undeniable. I studied him carefully, every nuance, every flicker of guilt and love, trying to understand if he truly meant it or if fear and social pressure had forced it out. I took a deep, shaky breath, letting the flood of emotion wash over me. I had survived imprisonment, betrayal, and despair. And yet here I was, facing a man I loved, who had no idea how much I had suffered. I allowed myself a brief moment of softening, acknowledging that despite everything, a part of me still clung to him. And Gabriel, I need to know that this is real, that you know what they did, and that you are here with me because you choose me, not because you were tricked. His hand sought mine, trembling slightly as our fingers intertwined. I choose you, Elodie. I always have. I believed the lies, yes, but seeing you now, nothing else matters. I love you. I never stopped. Tears streamed down my face, staining the dirt and sweat of my ordeal, but they were tears of relief, of recognition, of hope. I allowed myself to lean against him, my head resting briefly on his chest, feeling the warmth of his embrace. It was an anchor, a comfort, and a promise that we could navigate the aftermath of the betrayal together. Patricia and Sophie remained frozen, but the weight of public exposure was clear in their posture. The wedding staff and guests who had watched in stunned amazement began to murmur amongst themselves, realizing that the beautiful ceremony had been built on lies. Patricia's face was flushed with shame and frustration, and Sophie's bravado completely crumbled. I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. They had underestimated me, but I had reclaimed my place, my voice, my life. I pulled away slightly from Gabriel, searching for the truth in his eyes. Are we really going to make it through this? He nodded firmly, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face, a small smile breaking through the tension. We're going to make it through. I'll make sure of it. We have a second chance, and I won't let anything tear us apart again. I felt the tension ease from my body, the adrenaline subsiding to a quiet, victorious calm. Standing there, bruised but unbroken, I realized the journey wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my dignity, and my love. Gabriel and I had a chance to rebuild, stronger, more aware, and more determined to cherish what we had. We walked together, hand in hand, ignoring the stunned faces behind us. Every step was deliberate, a statement that we had endured, survived, and chosen each other despite the odds. The room seemed to shimmer with sunlight, every polished surface reflecting our shared triumph. I held my head high, tears still glistening in my eyes, but but my posture was strong, defiant, and radiant. Patricia's and Sophie's plans had failed, their cruelty exposed, and the truth was undeniable. Justice, in its quiet way, had been served. Gabriel and I, though scarred by the deception, had found our way back to each other. We embraced the moment, savoring the sweetness of reunion and the certainty that this time, no one could manipulate or steal our happiness. For the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine, unwavering peace. The world that had tried to erase me had been forced to acknowledge my existence. And with Gabriel by my side, I knew we would face the challenges ahead together, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable.